everybody, and welcome to the show. This particular show will feature a Richardson on Richardson duel, the likes of which may remind you of William F. Buckley with a hernia versus Cassius Clay at his most mellifluous. With me in the studio, Nicholas Richardson. And may I say, still unrelated.
Yes, still unrelated.
What a shame.
Despite the efforts of your mother.
What a shame. What a shame. Still working on that. I have the genealogist on that 24 hours a day. I have a special recruit. I had to fire the other one. Got a new person working on it.
Fingers crossed.
Yep, a lady with glasses. Her name is Gertrude, so I have great hopes.
Good.
Yeah, glasses and Gertrude. Get it?
Yes.
That sort of librarian cliche.
It is a bit of a cliche.
What the heck is going on? You're looking well.
Thank you. Going on where? Everywhere?
With you.
Oh, with me, I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah.
Busy, but do all sorts of things, but fine, as you can see.
You look fine.
Thank you. Better to be busy than not busy.
Well, it's better to be busy, even if you're just scrubbing the old toilet there.
Yeah, well, I'm doing something rather more interesting than scrubbing the old toilet.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
I said even if.
Even if, yes.
Yeah, but idle hands.
Idle hands, yes. The devil finds work for idle hands.
That's right. I just threw that out to see if you could what do you call it? Capping the quote?
Capping the quote, yes.
Could do that with poetry, but we won't do it.
No.
In case our audience is not familiar with 19th century English Romantic poetry, of which you're a specialist, I know.
If only it were true. If only my life were as others supposed it to be, it would be exciting.
Alfred Lord Tennyson is your god.
If only, if only.
He's your god. Now you went to, I got to tell you this, exciting. Someone wrote in from a loony bin, obviously, and said that this show reminded them a bit of the Bill Maher show.
No, you're right.
I said, I have to find out what they mean by that, because there are a lot of ways one could take that.
Yes, and how did you take it?
With a grain of salt. With a grain of sugar.
But it's nice that somebody wrote in.
That was sweet, yeah, to say. Now we had the biggest, we had a lot of people when we had this lady on from the Ukraine.
Yes.
From Ukraine. And she was very popular with, I mean, I didn't realize this, a marine biologist. She was very popular in Ukraine, in her area, in Kharkiv. And they got a lot of people watched the video from there and commented, oh, we love her, and all this. It's amazing. She's got a cult.
There you are.
Yeah.
You have top-notch people on your show.
Well, I guess, you know. It was amazing. I have to get her back on the show. Very nice lady. She was the ex-marine biologist who left her job in Moscow. Went straight, she's born in Kharkiv, but lived in Russia for 25 years, and her specialty is cold water marine life. Fascinating. That's how I met her through Rusty. Remember Rusty?
I remember Rusty.
Trusty Rusty, who's doing he's been on the show a couple times, 3 times. Anyway, doing the aid to Ukraine, Davai Ukraine, which means give to Ukraine. And I met her when Rusty invited me out for just a small glass of something. Sherry, I believe it was.
Sherry, yes.
Yes. We were wearing evening dress and whoring about.
I doubted very much.
We weren't.
Yeah, I doubt Rusty has any evening dress.
No, we were down the pub. So anyway, as they say, we were down the pub. That's what he said. He's Australian, of course. He said we were down the pub. I said, you mean we were down at the pub? No. I need a preposition here.
No, you don't.
I don't.
Not down the pub.
No, you don't, do you?
You don't.
Okay. So, and then I met her, and so he said, oh, this is a friend of ours who just got in touch. She's come from Kharkiv. She's in Warsaw. She's getting a pass to go to a conference, which is where she is now, in the States, to talk about marine biology. And what a good opportunity, right, for her. She's also had a lot of job offers over there, things like that, you know. And so she's a nice lady, and very talented, intelligent lady. And I just started talking to her, and the more I talked to her, the more she revealed these secrets about. We talked about Antarctica. She's been there.
And I suppose one of the problems with being a cold water marine biologist is that the water is not as cold as it should be in many parts of the world.
Yeah, maybe now. Yeah, we talked a little about it. I said, "Do you believe that the climate in the climate change paradigm?" She said, "Yes, because I see it.
Yeah, it's particularly
It's definitely changing.
very, very much.
Yeah. So, which it's you want to ask somebody who's been in those positions and seen it with their own eyes, and where better to see it than polar ice cap or the Antarctic. Yeah. Which is actually a continent, which once upon a time had flowing rivers and jungles.
Oh, nice.
Did you know that?
I didn't actually.
Yeah, I don't know. They say that's true, based on studying the layers of the
layers of the ice.
Yeah, layers of the ice. Yeah, interesting. This stuff. I mean, how old's the planet we're on? Is only 3 billion years old, right?
Yes.
That's not enough for me. That's not mysterious enough for me.
No, it's pretty mysterious. I mean,
when
can't
it gets
really.
to 5 or 6.
You can't. But when you talk about time, it's very hard to contemplate these large distances. I mean, we can think back our own lifetimes. We can go back quite easily 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years. But when you talk about 60 million years or 70 million years or whatever, that I just think for the human mind to contemplate that, it's very difficult. And then when you talk about billions of years, that's almost impossible. I don't think our brains have the capacity to imagine it.
We have trouble dealing with childhood, remembering back that far, right?
Exactly.
And so it makes sense that these times are just beyond our comprehension. No, they are. Let's face it.
Well,
I mean,
exactly.
100 years is almost beyond our comprehension. People who live to be 100 go, I can't believe I lived to be 100.
No. You may well do.
Yeah. You think I might?
Well, we all might.
We all might, because they're going to put little bots in us to,
But no,
go around and
generally
kill
think people are getting healthier. And
people are getting healthier?
I mean, those who don't do stupid things to their bodies, of course. I mean, people who smoke and drink to excess or do whatever else they do are not going to live to 100.
Yeah, we
but
should.
For average people doing averagely sensible things, the life expectancy, assuming they live in an averagely decent country, the life expectancy is increasing.
Which brings me to...
what's going on in the world?
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah, which brings... Well, I have several things written down, which we'll talk about. There's lots to talk about. Some interesting headlines as well. Elon, is that his name?
Elon Musk, and peculiar name.
Elon is peculiar, isn't it?
It is.
Isn't that the name of somebody on a song by Elton John?
I've no idea.
No, that's Levon. Yeah. That's another strange name. Never heard that one in actual life.
It's Elton without the T.
What?
Elton without the T. Elon.
It's Elton without the T. Of course it is.
Yeah.
I knew that secretly, somewhere deep within. We got a few things to talk about with the new Blitz in Kiev. Yeah. Another page out of the Hitler playbook for Mr. Putin.
Exactly.
He's a good guy. People give him.
Of course,
his publicity is so unfair.
You've got to at least give Hitler credit for the fact he was using his own missiles, which his own scientists had developed. I mean, the fact that Russia, this allegedly advanced country, is now having to buy in its weaponry from Iran is bizarre. It just shows how bad things are for Russia. No disrespect, of course, to the Iranian military
about
machine.
Drones, right?
But if I were the Iranians, of course, have denied that they had anything to do with this. But I think the Russians are going to find the problem when they're trying to buy weaponry soon. They'll find out that people don't want to be associated with their lack of success. If I'm selling my weaponry to somebody, I want to sell it to somebody who's going to win, because then it's good business. I'm not going to sell it to somebody who's going to lose, and probably Russia is going to lose, ultimately. I mean, it's surprising.
I don't know if they're going to lose or just drag it out until everybody's
just the point is, it must be an admission of failure now, that they have abandoned what we would call normal military activity to bombard civilian targets from a safe distance with missiles they've had to scrounge from other people. I mean, that's what we've really got to know. And if I was Putin, and the people around him presumably do have modicums of intelligence, they must begin to wonder what is actually going wrong. I mean, the problem we think, if we get rid of Putin, it's all going to be better. The problem is, if you look at who Putin is really surrounded by, the close people in the FSB and you know, they're all people who were with him in the KGB in St. Petersburg, or with him when he was, I think he was mayor of St. Petersburg for a short time, all of whom got very wealthy on being surrounded by Putin. So, and all of whom seem even more rabid than Putin does in terms of wanting to advance Mother Russia's mission, whatever that is. So
You're not suggesting that they're all biting each other.
Well, I'm suggesting, well, they probably are, but I'm suggesting that you know, Putin may be replaced by somebody even worse, not somebody better, because the system in Russia doesn't allow other people, an opposition, anybody else to emerge.
Okay, who's the best Russian leader of all time?
I don't know, Peter the Great, obviously.
It's got to be Peter the Great.
Yeah, probably.
He built
St.
Petersburg.
And he built it. What was St. Petersburg? It was his window on the West. He built it because he realized that to advance Russia, to bring it into the modern age, it had to import technology and ideas from elsewhere. What we now see, and we're seeing it in China also, is a complete reversal of that. You know, Mr. Xi, President Xi in China, who's now made himself leader for life, is closing down China, closing down the economy, becoming a sort of leader in a bunker mentality.
He's going Castro.
Yeah, and all he's interested in doing is exporting Chinese authoritarian ideas.
He's going to continue to crack down.
I mean, you would have seen, maybe you caught on, there was this terrible incident yesterday of a Hong Kong dissident in the street in Manchester in England, protesting outside the Chinese consulate, and he was dragged inside the Chinese consulate with the consul general there, pulling his hand and exactly beaten up until the police, to their credit, finally went through the gate and dragged him back out again. Now, a sensible government would say, fine, we're now going to close the Chinese consulate in Manchester. Go home. Whether they will or not remains to be seen. But this is an example, and they think they can get away with it, the example of bullying and a failure to maintain any degree of international standards, because that's how China is becoming, this military organization.
Okay. This is interesting. You've raised a good point. Now, you may not even realize where I'm going to go with this, but you raised a very good point, which is the decline in leadership, because I saw it immediately. I thought, well, not with this weak leader that they've got now, and the Conservatives.
Exactly.
She's terrible. Truss.
Unfortunately, she is out of her depth, yes.
She's out of her depth. It's not, I mean, I'm not saying I don't know her, I mean, but her policies.
Whoever took it on, the job at that particular time, was bound to have such a difficult time. Even if Mrs. Thatcher had taken it on that time, it would have been difficult. But because the circumstances surrounding it are very difficult.
The circumstances are getting worse?
She made it worse.
Yeah.
It's all right, you can go to the world and say, look, we're going to run a policy now of giving everybody a tax rebate, and we're going to go to the markets to borrow the money. Not what I would do, not what sensible economists would do, but fine, if that's your policy, fine. However, you must be prepared for the fact that the people who are going to lend you the money, i.e. the markets essentially, are going to have a view on your capacity to repay. Now, the British government is very fortunate in that it has never, ever in the history of the nation ever defaulted on a single loan. So your money is pretty safe. But the point is, the interest rate at which people are prepared to lend is going to be affected by that decision. It was a very weird, it was called a fiscal event rather than a budget, but it was still a very weird approach. There were some very strange things in it. And the first thing they did when they actually got to power is they sacked the permanent secretary at the Treasury, i.e. the man who actually, the senior civil servant who runs the Treasury, a man of immense experience. And why would you do that? And why would you pursue this sort of weird, everybody believes that we should, sensible people believe you should have, government should take only the minimum amount of tax to do the tasks which have to be done. And we all believe that you get a better economy if government is not interfering too much. That's fine. But at the moment where we are today, after the pandemic, after all the support that was given during the pandemic and the international climate, now with energy bills, this was not the time for a government to sort of go wild on profligacy. Now, Liz Truss thinks, oh, I'm a big supporter of Mrs. Thatcher. That's what Mrs. Thatcher did. But Mrs. Thatcher did her tax cuts.
But what's the the tax cuts.
Okay. Mrs. Thatcher did her tax cuts after a number of years when she'd actually brought the public finances under control. That was the difference. So Mrs. Thatcher was doing tax cuts from a position of strength, and Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, the shortest reigning Chancellor of the Exchequer. I know there was another one who died.
Another one died.
1970. Ian MacLeod died, unfortunately.
Yeah, under
another
Heath,
great loss. Under Heath, yes.
Yeah.
And they're doing it from a position of extreme weakness. And the idea that they couldn't be bothered to actually take into account what would happen It's very bad. But it's part of a wider issue, this lack of leadership, which we've seen in the United Kingdom now. We saw it in the United States first, of people who seem to be completely uncaring about what they're doing to the reputation of their country, what they're doing to establish norms. And they go, I mean, most recently in the United States in the case of Trump, but Biden's not much better. And this sort of collective taking leave of their senses and pursuing policies which appear to me, and I think they appear to many others, as favouring a very small section of the society already has more money than it knows what to do with. And when people have more money than they know what to do with, they do strange things. Elon Musk is a good example. Who now thinks...
Did you buy one of those flamethrowers?
No.
Only cost. He made only 20,000 of them. They sold out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, weird, and he's now, tweeting.
Yeah, let's get back to that.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to cap this point that you may have inadvertently made, but you certainly made it, about we don't know that we would get a better leader. Then we'll go to Musk. We don't know we get a better leader in Russia. We're not getting better leaders in any of the other countries.
And this is a great tragedy, because we should, in the United States and the United Kingdom, the two countries which have been blessed by political systems, which hitherto have allowed good leaders to emerge. And if we're showing such a bad example and bad leadership, what for the rest of the world? I mean, you look at the continent of Europe, across the continent of Europe, look in the European Union. Are there any good leaders there? Where are these great people? They just seem not to be produced anymore. We have a lot of
the new ones in Italy.
We have a lot of politicians who now are clearly focused only on their own benefit and not on. I mean, I think we shouldn't be too cynical. I think in years gone by, people who went into public life did genuinely have a wish to change things for the better. And I think it's unduly cynical to say, oh, they're all in it for what they can get out of it. But I think in recent years, that is increasingly emerging as a pattern. I mean, look at Tony Blair in the UK.
Yeah. Well, this is true.
Look how wealthy he and his family became. Even Neil Kinnock, the leader of the opposition at the time, a failure in politics, went off to Europe with his wife. They seemed to get some nice European cynicism, and all of a sudden become, by ordinary standards, quite wealthy. And this is very sinister, and this is very bad. And more for people becoming wealthy, if they want to set up, start a company, run a business, employ people, contribute, well, it doesn't matter how much money they have, that's fantastic. Well, but getting wealthy at the public expense or cashing in on your contacts made while a public official is, I think, rather sinister, because it calls into question whether the decisions you made were good decisions, or whether the decisions you made were with one eye on what would happen to you when you left that particular position.
Okay, this is a good point. We can say Harry Truman. I call him Harry. I know him well.
Yeah.
But Harry Truman, Harry S. Truman. What does the S stand for?
Can't
Nothing.
Remember.
It's just an S.
Just an S.
Yeah, another little fun thing. But he was very much in bad financial state when he left the presidency. And in fact, they instated the presidential pension for him because of him, and then for subsequent presidents. Little did they know.
I mean, even though you look at this contemporary, Winston Churchill was always in he insisted on living, of course, a lavish lifestyle, but he was in a mess. At one point, he thought he would have to sell his house till people stepped in to help him.
Which one, Blenheim?
No, Chartwell, his own house.
Chartwell.
Blenheim was not...
familial.
He was the son of a younger son, so Blenheim was never going to get his paws on Blenheim.
Yeah.
But the point is, in that generation, they worked, and he did all his journalism, all his writing to earn money to be able to be in politics.
Did Churchill have paws?
Have?
Paws.
Paws.
You see, you can get his paws on.
Oh, paws. Yes, his paws. No, I don't think, but it's just a nice expression, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, but he he looked like a little teddy bear, didn't he?
He did look like a little teddy bear.
Yeah, as he got older.
But there was no expectation among his generation that just because you've been Prime Minister, you should suddenly be given lots of money. Whereas the Blairs of this world seem to, and those that have followed seem to think that, and their concept of public service is different.
Started in the 90s.
It started
in the 90s.
It did.
And
it's got worse.
And it's got worse. The Clintons went in broke. I mean, I think Clinton was making $30,000 a year as the governor of Arkansas.
Yeah.
And the wife was in the law firm. They were broke when they went into the White House. That was a big job, a big payment, a big salary for him, and a big upgrade. and their lifestyle. But I mean, living in the White House, that's pretty much of the Lincoln bedroom.
The Lincoln bedroom.
I think I'll sleep in old Abe's bedroom tonight. I would say that. And well, Bush had money. Both Bushes had money already from Preston Bush, the grandfather of George Bush Jr.
I'm not against people who
but
are
Obama
wealthy
had no money
going into politics. What I'm surprised about, and what I think is dangerous, is when people with no money go into politics and suddenly, after they've left public office, suddenly emerge as being very wealthy.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Because it makes you question their decision making while they were in office.
Well, yes, of course it does. I mean, Biden was working with the credit card companies on the boards and things like that.
Yeah. So, but this all then leads to a problem.
They're based in Delaware.
It leads to a very poor quality people, and because the main reason it leads to poor quality people is because the rest of us, the normal toiling folk, become disenchanted with politics. So pay no attention. Oh, they're all the same. I'm not going to vote. It doesn't matter. Blah blah blah. And this is the worst thing that we can actually.
But does it really matter if we're going to blow ourselves up with nuclear weapons?
Well, I would hope it does matter, because if we have the right sort of people, then we won't be blowing ourselves up with nuclear weapons.
Well, this is the point. If people were reasonable, we talk about being reasonable on this show a lot, and I think, and being fair, trying to be. It's really important that this is something that's missing from the civil discourse today, we might say.
It is. It is.
The idea of fairness.
The partisanship is very distressing. It's tearing countries apart. I mean, look at, you know America better than I do, but this whole black and whiteness and this sort of fighting, ignoring the interests of the country and just fighting each other. I mean, it's just terrible, actually, and it's destroying everything everywhere, because you see it everywhere now. This inability to actually have parties who maybe have some policy differences, but generally are both genuinely interested in working for the benefit of the country and the people whom they represent. And this is what is lacking in public life now, everywhere. And I say everywhere, I mean particularly in the United States and the United Kingdom, because of the reasons I said earlier. These are the two countries which are sort of beacons of representative democracy and accountability, or they should be. And this is what is so distressing, because it makes you think, well, if these countries fail in that, where is the enlightenment going to come from? Where is the fight back going to come from?
How can you blame the other people in the world for having bad behavior when you've got all the advantages? It's like I always say about World War I. When somebody says, "Oh, I've really made a mistake. Oh, it's terrible," and I go, "Well, maybe it is, but you didn't start World War I. That was left to the wealthiest, the best connected."
And what we have to, what the challenge now, of course, is to avoid World War III. Well,
let's hold that, because we're going to go to a break now.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll maybe talk about Elon Musk's tweets and this very subject.
Okie dokie.
And continue this fascinating conversation with you, Nick.
Very good.
It's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. Yeah. Okay. Watch these exciting messages, and we'll see you right after the break. Welcome back for more of this exciting talk. Scintillating? No, it's too much, isn't it? I don't feel scintillating.
No, not quite.
No, I'm not sure what that means, because it's spelled funny, isn't it?
It is spelled funny, yes.
Yeah. So it looks like scintillating.
Scintillating, yes.
Yeah, something like that. So what we were talking about at the end was we said we'd come back and talk about Musk's tweets, and then I looked on my phone while we were in the break there, and here's an article from The Economist: How to Detect a Nuclear War. I mean, when we started talking about this stuff in March, we started talking about nuclear war possibility. Is Putin crazy? And I remember at the time, people saying, even on the show, people saying, "Oh, he's not crazy, he's going too far," and in private conversation, he's not a psychopath. Well, he obviously is. I mean, by the definition of what psychopathy is. I don't care what Jordan Peterson says. I heard Jordan Peterson actually saying he's not a psychopath. He's just he's a very practical man. I was like, what? You're a psychologist. Look up the definition of psychopathy. You know, it's meaning intentional harm to other people, right?
Exactly.
So, by that definition, he is minimally a psychopath.
Of course.
He might be nice to children, I don't know.
And animals. Psychopaths often are.
Yeah, like...
exactly. He was.
Little lady.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cute in those leather trousers. So, and here's the Economist saying, how to detect an imminent Russian nuclear attack. Western spooks. That means yeah, secret guys. Watch Russians' warheads for any sign of movement. Okay? And now we just talk about it. It's everywhere all the time.
It is.
And Elon Musk has come out. And are you familiar with the... Did you read the tweets or you just heard
about them? I just read about them.
Shall I tell you a little bit and then let you run with it?
All right, fine.
He's... First of all, he's been complaining about, I'm not getting paid for letting the Ukrainians use my communication system, right, in the atmosphere. Then he says, I have a plan for the end of the Ukraine war. They should be prepared to talk and get this finished, which, yeah.
Well, fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not them, it's the Russians. They started it. They've got to want to do it.
The conversation is very short. You started the war, let's stop the war. Please take your tanks and surrender the territory which you're illegally occupying. It's a very simple conversation.
Yeah, go away.
So I'm all for having that conversation if it spares people's lives.
Go away.
But well, that's not what Mr. Musk means, I imagine. He means, why don't you just keep Donbass because that's okay, and keep Crimea because that's okay, and we'll leave you alone and we'll all have a peaceful life, except you don't, because as we've seen throughout history, that's just an achievement I got because I threatened use of nuclear weapons. I'd like something more now.
Yeah, I think with Mr. Musk, this is a very obviously cerebral person, but I don't think that he's a great historian.
No.
Now, I could be wrong, but like a lot of people I know who are masters of technology, or this is their supreme skill. Engineers, for example, they don't often know a lot about history or literature or actually the meat and bones of life.
That's the problem, and we see, and these tech people seem, because they have such enormous wealth gathered so quickly, and because we're all dependent on their technology to a certain or lesser extent, they seem almost out of control, in fact. And in sinister ways now, the censorship which you get on Facebook and some of these other things is bizarre. As I've made the point before, Donald Trump may not be everybody's cup of tea, but he was elected as President of the United States, and when his term came to an end, he left. Yet he was banned from Facebook and Twitter. At the same time, the supreme leader of Iran, who's quite happy to kill people who disagree with him, no democratic mandate at all, is allowed to maintain a presence on these platforms, no doubt assorted Chinese and other allied folk. So the whole their concept in California, wherever these people live, of what is decent behaviour is completely distorted. Because it is distorted because they have so much wealth, they are completely out of any form of accountability, even as a sort of basic human beings, it seems. Sorry to be so harsh, but now I fancy going to Hawaii on holiday. Let's just buy a couple of islands, and the people who've lived there all their lives, well, tough luck. I don't care. It's your virgin forest. I want a house which I'm going to occupy for a few nights a year because I can, and I'm doing it.
Are you talking about the Facebook guy?
I'm talking about the Facebook guy, but they're all equally bad, unfortunately.
Now, you're supposed to be prepared to cut down on your use of gasoline, petrol,
because they can fly around in their fleets of private jets and so on. I mean, this is the whole thing, and this is in the absence of sensible political leadership. We have these sort of people grandstanding. But supposing Elon Musk seems to think, it's just very easy. They'll get together and we do some sort of deal.
But I don't think he thinks it's easy, does he?
No, well, maybe not easy, but he thinks that there is a deal to be done.
But this is what...
But not on the terms which anybody would find acceptable, because if you do a deal, and let's hope a deal can be done, it has to be on terms whereby you remove the problem for the future. And just by saying, it's all getting a bit inconvenient now, let's stop this war in Ukraine because, I'm getting a bit cold, my central heating's gone off. What about the poor people in Ukraine who don't have who's not only their central heating gone off, the roof of their house has gone off, and probably half of their family have been killed.
Or their arm has gone off.
Exactly.
Or their leg.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that, way too much of it. And as if even one or two cases wouldn't be enough. But he also has come out and said that he's talking about Russia could eliminate Europe and the United States within 30 minutes, and U.S. could do the same.
Exactly.
Well, this is the thing. In March, people would hardly talk about this, but it was obvious from the build-up. It's been obvious for a while that the nuclear war is just right behind the door.
Exactly.
And
if we're not careful.
And that, it's in that closet over there. So, after all these years since the Cuban Missile Crisis, right, and all the years of the Cold War, which you and I, remember some of that.
Indeed.
Yeah, and look at things now. It was never on the front page. It was never on the television news every night.
Because people were, it goes back to the crisis of leadership. People on both sides, I suspect, were just much more sensible. I mean, look at even when the Soviet Union was falling apart. Yeah. At no point did Gorbachev threaten nuclear Armageddon. Not even to save the Soviet Union, as it then
and neither did Chernenko or any of those guys.
No, they
before.
didn't.
Brezhnev.
They didn't.
Brezhnev was in love with Hollywood. He didn't want to destroy America.
Well, exactly. None of them wanted to destroy anything. They wanted in as much as it could, their political way of doing things to prevail, but not at the expense of there being no life on the planet at all.
I don't think they cared beyond after the revolution very much. After Stalin took control, I think it was all about power from then on, and how to manipulate the masses.
Well, exactly. But even to defend that in 1989 or thereabouts, at no point do I recall Gorbachev ever threatening anybody with weapons. And now Putin gets upset. Yeah. So
he never did.
The Putin idea of life seems to be, I can bomb women and children and kill them, and that's okay. But somebody blows up a part of a carriageway of a bridge, and that's an act of terrorism, which I then have to... I mean, this just shows how psychopathic these people are.
It's a very good point.
Essentially, we're dealing with small man syndrome. A former taxi driver is promoted above his position in life. Nothing wrong with driving taxis, may I add.
Yeah, so good, honest work.
Great people in the city, your typical City of London cabbie, marvellous folk. Yeah. But what we have in the Kremlin is a taxi driver who's been promoted above his capabilities, and an army which is made up of cowards and eunuchs. Essentially, they can rape women and children and steal things. That's the Russian army. But if they're faced with a real soldier, like a Ukrainian, they run away. This is what we're facing with. And so because they can't win that way, they say, let's just bomb cities because that's all we can do from a safe distance. If the Russian army was made of real soldiers, if they were brave people, or if Putin was a brave man, he'd be getting on his military fatigues, bearing his chest, riding his horse at the head of his army. But he's not doing that. He's hiding in the Kremlin, where he probably sees nobody apart from a few yes-men.
Well, look, he's so afraid of COVID, there's no telling how afraid of bullets he is.
Well, exactly. We're dealing...
Which is rational. That might be the most rational thing about him.
Nobody wants to stand in the way of a bullet.
Yeah, that's the most rational thing about him.
So we're dealing with... And the fact they are now bombing cities, I think, from a military point of view, shows in actual fact they've got nothing left to offer. And they're now trying to involve Belarus in this. And it's debatable whether the Belarusians will actually...
Forget it.
Exactly.
Lukashenko has to do everything he can, because to be subservient to Putin, because without him, he'd already be out of power.
But Lukashenko has faced...
without Putin, Lukashenko would be out of power.
Lukashenko has faced popular protests in a way which Russians haven't.
No, I mean, literally, the Russians sent troops in.
Exactly.
And, it was a sort of Czechoslovakia Mark II. The 68 thing.
This is probably just a bluff to try and divert Ukrainian forces to north of Kiev when they could be doing better work, not better work, but essentially have more impact in the south, moving towards the Crimea and taking big cities like Kherson.
The Russians are in no position to do anything from there now. Right. Not right now.
All the Russians can do, unfortunately, now, and they can do a lot of damage by the missiles. But they're having to use missiles from Iran. I think even the Iranians will come to a point and say, well, hang on a minute, this is getting us a lot of bad press.
No, they're not missiles. Can we be a little more precise?
Yes, they are.
I have a reason why.
I know, they are drones at the moment.
They're drones?
Yes, but there also have been some suggestions of the Iranians selling missiles as well as the drones.
Well, maybe they will, but
exactly.
I mean, where do they get the missiles from?
Well, the Iranians make missiles.
They make them?
Yeah.
Like those Scuds that
exactly.
Saddam used to no effect.
But those are the Iraqis.
Just got his whole country invaded. I don't know what to say.
Yes, you're thinking about these drones.
Yes. They make a noise just like the buzz bombs when you watch the old movies or the serial, the movie tone serials.
They came over London making that noise,
right.
And then the noise stopped. You knew the next noise you'd hear would be an explosion.
And these things make a noise when they're coming in. If you watch the films, it's the same idea. We haven't progressed at all.
It's designed to terrorize the population.
Yeah, we haven't progressed at all.
No. Well, I think everybody else has progressed. Unfortunately, the Russian military has not progressed. To the extent they tried to progress, the money was clearly stolen by people in the army, which is this money.
I don't mean the progression, I mean the mentality.
No,
we haven't really progressed because they have the Russian elite, who's in charge of this, has more advantages than anyone else. I mean, these guys have the world open to them.
Exactly. And
it's not enough.
No, that's the point. Unfortunately.
It's not enough. This is the problem.
It is. And this is what it is, greed. Nothing's ever enough for people anymore. They have more than they could ever have dreamt of, and it's not enough for them all of a sudden.
It's worth making this point. I should make it every show. We live in the average person, even a poor person in the United States, or in Poland, lives better than Rockefeller did in terms of healthcare availability and medicine.
Yes, we often forget that, in fact, yes.
And clean hot water. And,
exactly.
And
access to education, all sorts of...
access to washing.
Women dying in childbirth, exactly, all these sort of things.
All of these things. Diseases.
Exactly.
Polio, rickets, et cetera,
exactly.
and so forth. We live a better life. But that isn't what people talk about. They talk about how they don't have enough.
Exactly.
I must have more.
Exactly. And they already have a lot. I mean, how many cars do you need? How many houses do you need? How many yachts do you actually need?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is where socialist thought meets, or utilitarian thought meets, early 19th century meets the sort of, what's his name, the Greek, Epicurus.
Exactly.
Some of the Greeks.
And part of the problem is, of course, social media, which we've talked about before, is feeding people's feeling of inadequacy or dissatisfaction.
Or the Stoics, even.
Yes.
Who believed in managing your resources and managing your expectations was key to life.
And key to happiness.
And key to happiness, and the happiness, knowing that
people are
being
just,
the key to life.
And the whole economy now seems to work on people being told they're inadequate, they need things.
I think one of the reasons is because, if you go back and look at Epicurus as well, one of the reasons is that we are quite separate more and more from each other.
Yes, we are.
We don't have that,
and
COVID even proved it
yes,
more.
And this is another point which goes back to part of the problem with the way we're governed, is that when I was younger, and I'm sure when you were younger, major political parties had much more contact with the people. The Conservative Party, the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, for example, had millions of members. When I was at university. And people, there was activity, there was normal people were involved in the process. Now they have, fewer than 200,000 or something like, which is just crazy.
No, there used to be
there's been
canvassing all the time and all this.
There's now this disconnect between the politicians and the people as a whole, which is...
Not just the politicians, but we from each other.
Exactly.
These things that we get, I mean, this is getting maybe a little philosophical, but or too philosophical for our usual topics, but the wealth that we've created is separating us. It's not uniting us.
Well, unfortunately, yes. I mean, one of the saddest things you see is if you go to...
But it's actually a conservative principle not to be that way.
Well, of course it is. But what we've done, and really it's somehow the economics took a strange turn at some point in the 90s. We've sort of created this idea that community spirit is somehow wrong. You know, I don't know whether it's still popular in America, but all these bowling leagues people used to go to, you know, there were lots of community activities which people did.
Yeah.
And now they seem not to do it to the same extent. They were what some people have called civil society, or the small, was it Edmund Burke, the small battalions? Can't remember. But the point is, all sorts of activities which people did, they went, you know, together. Hobbies or whatever it was, it didn't matter. And even the political parties in the UK had that. You know, they had their annual constituency
I think it's
dinner.
creating loneliness.
It is.
And it's creating violence. Loneliness leads to anger, leads to violence.
I mean, there's nothing worse than loneliness for people. I understand. There can be nothing worse for somebody who's lonely and unemployed. It's terribly demoralising and destructive of them and the wider society. And we have to be aware of this. And these devices, you have one in front of you, are not helping. And that's part of the problem. They are creating a feeling that, oh, well, my life is not as it should be on Instagram. Help. I'm failing miserably. I want something, and I've got to. Where
people advertise, everybody wants. It's very much the Andy Warhol thing. Everybody's getting wants their 15 minutes, and they're getting it. And Facebook, or they're getting it in increments by posting photographs of themselves doing things.
Well, I'm as guilty. I'm not as guilty as everybody. I post occasional ones, but they're mainly related to.
But we all do it to some extent. But some people do it more than others. We all do it to some extent. I think YouTube is an amazing thing. There's some great stuff on YouTube if you can get through the rubbish. You have to get through the nonsense, but it's great.
And it's fantastic.
Idea.
That, you know, if you want to do anything in life, you can find a video on YouTube telling you how to do it. If you
I think that's amazing.
Replace the grip on your tennis racket, or.
But this is a community meeting place. YouTube, as you just said, you can find out how to fix your car. You can find out how to bake a cake. You can find out, how to solve a problem in mathematics, if you're studying.
That's right.
You can find out the history.
But what people are doing is they seem
whatever.
not to be actually physically meeting each other to the same extent. And when they do, there's nothing sadder. You go to any restaurant and you might see a man and a woman having supper, and they're both on their telephone. I mean, if you feel that way, why are you wasting your time having supper together? Can't you put your phone away for that time?
Well, I've been guilty of that.
Or children on a park bench, instead of talking to each other, they're playing on their phones together. It's just very weird. I think.
You should put your phone down at certain
Because
points.
then people are losing the ability to interact socially. And then you find a lot of lonely and frustrated people. Or people will say, or women will say, or men will say, I want to meet the special person. But they've lost the ability to, physically in a position where they meet the special person. If they meet the special person, they don't have anything to say to each other because they've lost the ability to communicate. Not all of us. You haven't lost the ability. I probably haven't lost the ability. But we're of a different generation. We existed before any of this stuff came along, so it doesn't have the same effect on it. The same way if I won the lottery tomorrow, it'd be fantastic. I would have lots of positive things to spend the money on. If I'd won the lottery when I was 19, it might have been not so good. And this is the point. But young people today, I think, are just growing up. I look at my own boys who are, 21 and 17, and for them, a lot of their life revolves around the telephone. They do everything online. They order things from the shops online.
That's true.
And for them, it's just completely normal.
Yeah.
And, they have other things in life as well. They do meet their friends and so on. So I'm quite lucky as a father in that respect. But, it is just a completely different life when you're dominated by your telephone and by social media.
Ding.
Exactly.
I need a little bell to say when there's going to be a break, but there isn't going to be a break.
There's going to be another break, good.
Yeah.
So you're right. So we will now have all these very lonely, unconnected people at a time when the leaders are not very good either, at a time when we're edging towards potentially a Third World War. Why do I say Third World War? Because this will spread, because now, of course...
Isn't the first part of having, if I may...
Yeah, of course.
Because we're running down to time.
It's your show.
We're running down to... Come on. Isn't talking about something and having it in your mind all the time the first step, or even further down the road to making it happen? You're making it something that is realistic. It was unthinkable that people would use nuclear weapons, and now it's being talked about as if it's possible.
Well, exactly.
And even survivable in some sense. And maybe it's kind of like those potato chips, right? You can't eat just one.
Well, exactly.
You can't fire just one, right? People retaliate.
They do.
Nobody is going to take that lying down.
And that's the problem, and it'll spread. I mean, for example, we now see, because the Iranians are supplying these weapons, these drones to Russia, it appears that for Israel, this is all getting a bit too much. So Israel have now said they'll start supplying things to Ukraine, and and then no doubt somebody in the Middle East will say, well, hang on, if Israel is getting involved in this war, because I mean, up to this point, it appears that Israel was a bit ambivalent. You know, all the Russian oligarchs who couldn't live in the south of France or wherever seem to find a nice billet in Tel Aviv. I'm exaggerating slightly because it's funny that way.
And there are people a lot of people of Jewish descent.
And all of a sudden it starts becoming a lot more complicated, which is why it's very important that we continue to support Ukraine. And we sounds harsh, but we confine the war to this area with a clear objective, which is to make sure that Ukraine has its territory back and the Russian forces are withdrawn from Ukrainian territory. That's a clearly defined aim. That's very reasonable. That's not attacking Russia. That's not asking for anything over the ordinary. That's what we have to focus on, and not allow these other extraneous factors and the tweets of Mr. Musk to interfere with that process.
Well, he is the sort of Howard Hughes of our time. But Howard Hughes didn't really bother himself unless somebody bothered him.
Well, he was just happy to live in a germ-free environment.
Yeah, germ-free. Talking about anti-COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah, so he was a little bit different. But Elon Musk, definitely the Howard Hughes of our time, but much more out there. He's like, well, the young Howard Hughes was out there all the time.
You see, part of the problem is that those people running our countries, the politicians who should know better, are in awe of the wealth of these people. And this is what we have. We used to have people running our countries who didn't really care about the money, mainly because they had enough for themselves anyway. And now we have a group of politicians who tend to be a bit younger when they achieve high office, are materially much less well off than many of the people who are they surrounded by. And they, I think, begin to envy it. I mean, this was clearly the case with Tony Blair. He envied the people who were rich, who were around him. And
it's very socialist of him.
Yeah, well, of course, but there we are.
But that's what anybody Polish or from Central Europe knows, or Russian.
And this is the problem now, you see.
Knows how that works.
And so they always look at, what am I doing when I leave office? How can I earn some money? And this is why we don't get the quality of leadership we have. Because the sort of people who do have the integrity, who do have the skills we need, of course, are increasingly put off politics because of the intrusion, the complete nonsense, this 24-hour attention, this attention on your families, this raking back through anything you might have said 100 years ago to use against you. And it puts off talented people from being involved.
Of course it does.
And so we then end up in this mess where we face a serious world crisis, a number of crises, in fact, and we don't have politicians with the mental capacity and the integrity to deal with it in a sensible fashion. And we don't have them in lots of countries at the same time, and that's actually quite frightening, I think.
Yeah, it seems to be another endemic. Not good enough leaders. Okay, that's all we have time for. Nicholas Richardson, thank you.
My pleasure as always.
Thank you for being here. It's good to see you.
And you.
And I'll say goodbye to all of you. You're looking well, and why don't you stay that way?